DUI checkpoints. Now, they're not legal in every state, but they are legal in Las Vegas. There are rules that police have to follow if they're going to do a DUI checkpoint. The police have to announce publicly when and where they're going to do that. And it does not matter whether you have seen the announcement. So long as they've done it publicly, they are allowed to have the checkpoint. DUI checkpoints without notice would be considered an illegal stop. You see, police can't just stop you because they want to talk with you. They're not allowed to simply pull people over without probable cause or without reasonable suspicion. The exception is a DUI checkpoint. They give warning that you're about to enter a checkpoint zone. You do not have to enter the DUI checkpoint zone, but once you do, you've consented to be stopped. Now here's the catch. You can't break any traffic laws in avoiding the checkpoint zone. And so they generally set these up so that once you've entered the zone, you are in a more confined, constrained space where if you're going to exit, you probably are going to have to break or violate a traffic law to get out, which would be probable cause to stop you. How do they decide what cars to stop? Whatever it is they do, they are required to choose a neutral algorithm. So they could stop every car. They can't stop every car that's driven by a woman or a man. Those are categorizations they can't do. So they could, for example, stop every fifth car. One of the things that they tend to do in these traffic DUI checkpoint zones, they will often set up their cones so that the cones themselves act kind of like a sobriety test. They will put the cones so you have to navigate through them, and they are going to be watching how you navigate. If you're in a checkpoint zone, make sure that you drive slowly and in control, drive smoothly, because if you don't do those things, you will give them reasonable suspicion to stop and check you for sobriety. So now you're stopped. What are your rights? Once you're stopped, if you are driving, you have to identify yourself. You must produce your driver's license, your registration, your insurance. You don't have to answer questions. You don't have to tell them where you're coming from, where you're going. You don't have to tell them if you've been drinking. Don't answer questions. If they ask you questions, simply say, "Officer, with due respect, I don't answer questions." Although drivers have to identify themselves with physical identification, specifically a driver's license, a passenger does not have to ever use physical identification to identify themselves. You never have to give your driver's license. The only exception is if you are concealed carrying. At that point, you do have to provide ID and identify that you are concealed carrying. You have to follow the concealed carry laws. But outside of that, you don't have to give physical identification. Not only that, passengers by law don't have to identify themselves unless the police have reasonable suspicion or probable cause as to that passenger. If they ask you or they tell you to get out of the car, you have to get out of the car. You do not have to comply with their request for a sobriety test. You can respectfully tell them no. Now, if you tell them no, if they have no other reason to think that you've been drinking, they cannot go forward. If they have probable cause, and they actually arrest you, at that point, they will request you give up your blood. They want to take a blood sample. In Nevada, if you reject that request after you've been arrested, you lose your license for a year. And then they'll just go get a warrant and they'll get your blood anyway. So as a practical matter, once you've been arrested, you probably should consent to the blood draw. So when officers do draw your blood, they generally will take you to a hospital and a nurse will draw your blood. If you refuse, they will get a warrant for the blood. And once they get the warrant, they will show you the warrant and again ask you to comply. If you don't comply, they will get about 10 officers, and those 10 officers will force you into a chair. They will bind you to that chair. They will restrain you, and then a nurse will draw your blood. So, take your pick. The pro tip for anybody ever dealing with police: if you feel like they are ordering you to do something, you can always ask, and you should always ask, "Officer, is that a request or an order?" At that point, the officer has to clarify whether he is simply asking you to do something that you can do out of the kindness of your heart because you're a friendly guy and you like to do what they tell you to do, or whether they are using their position as an officer of the law to tell you to do something. You must comply with orders. We can deal later on with whether they are lawful or not. And if you don't comply, then you will be arrested for not complying with an order. Remember, don't drink and drive. If you're ever in a DUI checkpoint or any officer encounter, be polite. Know your rights. And if you are going to assert your rights, do it respectfully, and then you'll have the best outcome.